Assalamu alaikum, bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome back everyone to Behind the Minbar, Blueprints for a Better Masjid. And allergies flaring or not, I had to make sure to record this final episode in Istanbul with my beloved brother and friend, Dr. Mohannad. Hakeem, welcome, akhi.
حياكم الله شيخ جزاكم
Allah
الله خير.
yabarak feekum. Dr. Mohannad, I'm going to keep it super brief because his bio is too big and I'm throwing it in the description of the video. Mechanical engineer, mashallah, community educator and activist, imam, author, alhamdulillah. And I've been trying to corner you, to be honest, since I was gifted your book. So let me do a quick plug here. I'll throw a link in the description of the video for the book 40 Hadith on Community Service and Activism, so you can buy your own copies. You're not going to get a signed copy like me. Allah yahfadak, Shaykh. May Allah bless you and accept you on behalf of yourself and your family who puts up with us throughout. I maybe never shared with you that, alhamdulillah, at the monthly all-hands meetings in our masjid, we do a hadith a month out of your book.
Oh, subhanallah. Okay.
Yeah, فجزاkallah khairan for that.
متقبل. نعم.
And, you know, I've been trying for a long time to get you into the Behind the Minbar hot seat, to give people a taste or a teaser of what the book has of gems and of benefits. But you skipped town. You crossed the ocean. You skipped a few continents over. But mashallah, you seem to still be engaged in some level of community work despite relocating to Lebanon. How has that been?
Subhanallah. So Sheikh, والله يعني born and raised in Lebanon, moved to the US, did my PhD there, but I'm always connected to the Muslim world. Alhamdulillah, all of us are with Gaza and all these events happening. And subhanallah, the Muslim world is really one small village, one small town. So alhamdulillah, it's a blessing to be always connected. I think the Middle East or the Arab world, they need the North American experience, you know, with the English speaking becoming very prevalent. So they all follow Yaqeen, they follow a lot of the lectures and content. And at the same time, we have a lot of Arabic speaking individuals in the US who also follow work from the Muslim world. So alhamdulillah, it's already happening. So I'm being part of this experience.
MashaAllah. May Allah Azza wa Jal make you instrumental for khair and use you and allow your legacy to live until the day of judgment, and bless your steps wherever He turns you. Sheikh, at this sort of platform, we talk a lot, of course, about the importance of bettering our masajid through staffing up, through recruiting the right talent, through retaining the right talent. But in no short-term span, as far as we can tell, Allah knows best, will we ever fully wean off of the need for healthy presence of volunteers, or if I can call them high-performing, high-voltage volunteers. And even that term voltage, right? Like electric shock, it's kind of, there's like an image always in my head that the volunteer is either just absent, you know, not motivated enough to get involved, or not secure or confident or have enough clarity, whatever, but they're disengaged, or they're like a spark plug. You just plug them in but at the same time, they can burn themselves out or sort of clash and feel disengaged. At the end of the day, it works against the momentum and the direction of our centers, our masajid, our schools. And so I wanted to try to work through some of the golden principles we take from our deen. You've done such a great job, Jazakallah khairan, extrapolating lessons from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ on community service. How do you see the framing of the discussion of volunteership, right? Like the volunteers, whether, you know, not performing, not around, or not staying around, whatever that may mean.
Yeah. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa rasulullah. So, first of all, we have to understand that the prophetic experience with recruiting people and inspiring people and motivating people towards everlasting change in their lives and in the life of others is phenomenal, subhanallah. And if we really want to experience or examine the prophetic wisdom on community service, we have to let the Prophet ﷺ speak. And what I mean, it's not like a cliche, but what I mean is that we have to really lower the noise around volunteering that we get from other experiences, from other leadership books and what have you, not because we don't like it, but we really, the ayah, لا ترفع أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. Do not raise your voice over the voice of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So really, let's try to bring that experience in, and then we can correlate. Then we can see what other wisdom we can benefit from it. So that's kind of the first approach that we tried in the book. That some of these ahadith may present a different image to what we expect, but that's completely fine. That's what we should be doing. We should not have an idea in mind and then look for a prophetic justification for the idea that I already have. Otherwise, you will be going in circles. Subhanallah. One thing that when we talk about the layers of the community and how people in the community are involved in the masjid, there is 3 ayat in Surah Al-Hashr that talk about the 3 layers of how people could get invested in the community work. So these 3 layers were present in the Medina. للفقراء المهاجرين الذين أخرجوا من ديارهم وأموالهم يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا وينصرون الله ورسوله. So the first layer is the immigrants, who sacrificed everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you see this in our communities. Those who sacrifice everything, they are the first one in, last one out type of volunteer. And then the outer layer is Al-Ansar, right? والذين تبوأوا الدار والإيمان من قبلهم يحبون من هاجر إليهم. The Ansar are basically supporters to the Muhajirin. So they are contributors, but they are not as invested as the Muhajirin, right? And then the outer layer is والذين جاءوا من بعدهم يقولون ربنا اغفر لنا والإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان. So those who benefit from the sacrifice of the Muhajirin and the Ansar. And in every community you see people who are core volunteers, volunteers who layer 1, volunteers who show up on the day of the event and they are kind of mindly involved, and people who benefit from the 3 from the other 2. Ideally, you would want to get people from the outer circle to the inner circle to the inner circle, while understanding, number 1, not everyone has to be the Muhajirin. Not everyone has to sacrifice all of their money, all of their time. Not everyone has to burn out, because people at a different level. We highlight the sacrifice of Bilal bin Rabah, radiallahu anhu wa ardah, who resisted the torture, and he kept saying ahadun ahad, although he had a permission from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to not resist, all of that torture. But we forget that there are some Sahaba like Ammar bin Yasir who said the word of kufr, وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. So sometimes there is an expectation that you have to be a super volunteer or you're out, and this is creating a lot of spiritual struggle for people who want to grow to the deen, in the deen. And I strongly believe that for me personally, the way I got to love Islam is by working for Islam. The way I got to love the Quran, love zakat, love education circles, is because I was serving them. And I really this is the experience I want my kids to experience. And this is what everyone, if you are on the spectator seat when it comes to Islam, if you're only audience, if you're only watching, if you're only attending lectures, but there's no stakes, there's no skin in the game, I'm afraid that you're missing out a lot of spiritual benefit, subhanallah. And I'm afraid that person might feel later on that Islam is not for them, or they might have some ideological challenges, not because there's actual ideological challenges, just because
they've never experienced how Islam is transformative or relevant for the reality, relevant for our current reality, our modern day reality. So I do want to rewind a little bit because this framing sounds foundational and you're about to build on it. But before you do, you mentioned the reverse engineering that people do, that they just take some foreign concept without fully vetting whether it's Islamic or prophetic or not, and they just throw sort of like a hadith sticker on it without double checking if the hadith actually means that, or if you contextualize it, other hadith, will it give you the same messaging? Have you seen certain mainstream best practices? Because we've found ourselves just doing that a lot in this podcast, that trying to splice what does and doesn't fit from like the for-profit into the non-profit world, from the corporate to the sort of religious institutional world. And so are there certain patterns you've seen of idea imports, best practice imports from the for-profit, the corporate, the mainstream world that could be harmful, could be counterproductive, could be presumed wisdom, but in fact actually it's not very wise at all?
That's a very profound question, and we struggled with this a lot. Let me give you examples. When we define our metrics in the da'wah word, around numbers. How was the turnout? How many people downloaded our podcast? How many people liked or commented? So all of these are magnifying the numbers, the kathra. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us in the Quran, أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرِ. So just could be really losing the human impact and the focus on the individual. لأن يهدي الله بك رجلا واحدا خير لك من الدنيا وما فيها. If only a man is guided by you. So imagine that individual, that one-on-one discussion. Now, of course, we're not against giving the da'wah to the masses, but we should really focus on the individual. And even in communication, you have to focus on your avatar, focus on your niche, focus on your customer. And the more you are focused on the individual, the more you are aligning with the prophetic tradition. Subhanallah. The idea, طُوبَى لِعَبْدٍ آخِذٍ بِعَنَانِ فَرَسِهِ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. When the Prophet ﷺ is praising the one who is working behind the scenes. This is kind of, I think, the second hadith in the book. The one working behind the scenes, they don't care about the spotlight. And I think we have to whether we realize it or not, we're living in a very materialistic, capitalistic world, and our metrics are being invaded, and we have to get out of. We have to always ask ourselves, if only one person attends my halaqah, I should be sincerely happy. If only one person is guided by this, quality versus quantity, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the
Beautiful, mashallah. So in terms of the volunteers themselves, not pulling them all the way in where they could work out, burnout, that's not for everybody. What do you see as sort of the trajectory of many volunteers, why they don't come in, that's one of them, or why they may leave the spectrum of best and worst practices with volunteers in community service, whether in the masjid or otherwise?
Now, so the volunteers and the Muslim professionals that I worked with are basically the most disenfranchised, demographics in our communities. Generally speaking, they are busy. They have specific talents. They would love to help the masjid in these specific talents, whether it's marketing, whether it's data analytics, whether it's fundraising, or but there's no enough recruitment for these people that will fit the needs of the community. They need them either to be ushers. Normally the need is for ushers, for speakers, for board members who can spend hours in a meeting where there isn't enough value of these discussions. So a major part of this is understanding where these volunteers are, what are their talents, what can they bring to the community, and trying to make the volunteering not about the masjid but about their spiritual needs. And that's something that we fail to observe sometimes.
Like, why care about volunteering? What's my intention here?
It's part of their growth. It's part of their development. Subhanallah, our scholars used to say zakatul ilmi infaqu. That charity for knowledge is when you donate from that knowledge. And I came up with this rule of thumb that the zakat for money is 2.5%, like 1/40. And the idea is that if you have been in a masjid setting for 40 halaqas, if you have been in a masjid environment and you kind of attended and benefited from 40 events, maybe it's about time that you start volunteering for 1 or 2 events. Which is this is, again, get people out of consuming and taking, and masjid hopping in Michigan, where I used to live. We have a lot of events happening, alhamdulillah, and that's great. However, the challenge is when people get used to consume and attend versus give back and volunteer.
MashaAllah. And I would, if you would permit me, you're the guy who literally wrote the book on this, I would add another one to this, which is, if you are now volunteering at a certain level, as you said, they're concentric circles.
Yeah.
But if you're a little bit more of the committed layer of volunteers, you're putting in 40 hours a month, obviously not a week, then you should be invested in, right? You should sort of have some sort of tarbawi component where you're hearing the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that are related to community service or related to even the ahkam. I mean, one of the ways we remember Allah is through our conduct. So what I should and shouldn't be doing, how the Prophet ﷺ did these sorts of things. And I think people are, at Yaqeen, we have bi-weekly Tabia Sessions with Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj for a few years. Now it's Dr. Tahir Wyatt. Has been going through books with us. And people, their hearts are won over, to be honest. This is sort of internal. It's not advertised. They have almost exclusive access to the sheikh, if you will.
No.
And it's, I think even that component is very prophetic and very Islamic, that you give those doing more and more, right? It's almost like the al-fuqara al-muhajirin had the greatest right to the spoils, what the resources that were left behind after a battle. That's the verses you began with. So it just made the trickle effect. It was like, hey, wait a minute, they also deserve to get more.
No.
How else has the Prophet ﷺ, guided us along in terms of the importance of winning people over? Because I'll tell you one thing I've clocked is that there's so much work to be done. Those most willing to do it, we forget that they're human, right?
No.
And so we don't see them anywhere except that we're talking about Masjid. Like I sometimes I stop myself, and I have good brothers who indirectly and politely stop me. Like, we're waiting for the next game on the basketball court, and the conversation drifts back into something budget or policy or related, right? So winning the hearts from the prophetic approach.
SubhanAllah. So you mentioned something interesting about focusing on those who serve first. And this has been a slogan in our masjid in Dearborn, and even when we worked in the MSA in Lebanon. My target audience sometimes is not the general audience. Sometimes you would do a whole event, you do a Eid event, you are creating a good environment for the kids of the community, but the core beneficiary of this event is the volunteers themselves, how their experience, because it's kind of growth for them. My favorite story in this, Sheikh, is the story of Abdullah bin Maktoum. عبس وتولى أن جاءه الأعمى, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rebuked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why did you frown in the face of a blind man? This Abdullah ibn Maktoum, he was a Sahabi, he was from the inner circle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet could have waited until he finished da'wah to the Quraysh, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlighted that he comes first. And Abdullah, if you notice the customer journey of the Sahabi, or the Sahabi journey of the Sahabi within the spiritual circles of volunteering and service to Islam, it's amazing. He was, again, a whole surah was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, telling him, focus on him, don't focus on the Quraysh. Of course, I'm paraphrasing a lot of layers here. Yeah. And then, Abdullah, if you notice him in Medina, he turned from being the student of knowledge who's always asking questions and taking notes into a leadership role. He was left on Medina when the armies were outside. He was the adhan, in charge of the adhan. Although you would argue about it that it was very inefficient, and I heard this from Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangda, may Allah reward him. It was very inefficient from an HR perspective to hire Abdullah to be the mu'adhin, because you need someone else to look at the sun and tell him when is the time for salat. There's no adhan app back then, right? But Abdullah was part of the community, and subhanallah. And a famous story when he was getting excused from the Prophet ﷺ not to come to the adhan, to the congregation because he's blind, but the Prophet ﷺ kept on raising the bar on him. No, you need to be part. You have to attend. And then, if you notice how Abdullah evolved in his role in the Muslim community, fast forward after the death of the Prophet ﷺ in the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, when he went with the Muslim army, and he was the flag carrier. And subhanallah, he told them, why don't you guys give me the flag? Because even if the army is running away, I'm blind, I cannot see. So it's a strength, not a weakness. So I'm going to keep carrying the flag. And he was martyred, subhanallah, while carrying the flag of Islam in Al-Qadisiyah. So if you notice that we have many Abdullah ibn Maktums in our community that are kind of left alone. We have so much talents that we are not noticing, because sometimes we're always focusing on the outside versus the inner circle. So
subhanallah, there's a masjid that I'm going to have to fudge details here because that's their right upon me, but that I did not feel very impactful. I felt I was hindered, intentionally or not, but I had relatively speaking, the greatest impact of the teachers, the educators, the speakers, the preachers in that masjid or chain of masjids, to be honest, in New York City. And I just felt like, I'm building somewhere and others are tearing it down, whether they intend to or not. So I drifted away from this masjid. And I started giving my classes and putting my time in other masjids where I felt like the soil was more fertile. That's all.
No.
You're just going to have to make a judgment call on life. There really is no hard feelings. Allah's my witness. And then eventually I left the state to where I am now, Allentown, Pennsylvania. And fast forward, like, say, it's about 10 years, maybe a little less, actually. The CEO of that chain of masjids in New York City insists that I come down. We have to speak in person. It can't be a phone call. And he sits down. He tries to make amends. And he feels like, we didn't take full advantage of you when you were here. And what's it going to take to bring you back to New York City? And I had learned throughout those 10 years that what's far more valuable for what this masjid needs, this masjid that I left, was not actually a preacher, but people to work behind the scenes, the infrastructure, the inner workings, the growth, the weaning off of fundraising dependency, and all of the challenges they have that I believe stagnated them more than they had to. So I told him, Sheikh, I know you're not going to believe me, but I swear to you, if I come back, it's not going to have the impact you think. Number one, unless you hand me the entire organization,
No.
which I don't expect you to do. Number two, I promise you have people sitting in front of you for the past few years in Jumu'ah that are probably consultants for like Fortune 500 companies, and they have like true skill sets. Just activate them. It's not right that we underestimate their intelligence. It's not right that we assume that no one can do this better than us. And I felt like I was a little bit too passionate even in my language, but I was keeping it respectful. But I'm so certain of this now. It's like it, and anyway, alhamdulillah for that. I really hope more masajid will just believe me. I swear to you, you don't need some superstar public figure as much as you need, right? It could even be counterproductive, especially at certain phases in your organization, to have, a disproportionate talent level, right? Because everyone will sort of gravitate towards what has like celebrity status, and they will continue to not appreciate the underground where the work really needs to be done at the moment. In any case, that was my rant because I have, it's a pain point for me. But you mentioned something so beautiful about Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anh, which is even his evolution from one role to another, right?
No.
And sometimes there's no room for growth within the organization, and we look outside for talent. We're like, hey, how about we groom him into being the next, right?
No.
Or the next role that doesn't even currently exist right now. But what I also wanted to ask is, let's say they're not recognized. Often there's this notion that they cannot call attention to themselves, asking for leadership. Is that problematic Islamically? And of course, there's a fiqhi discussion here, but I felt like you packaged it in a very concise, compelling way in the book. So please, work us through that.
Yeah, subhanAllah. So of course, the famous hadith that's mentioned in the book about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ telling Abu Dharr, إنها أمانة وإنها يوم القيامة خزي وندامة. He was telling him it's a big trust, so you should not be taking it. It's some scholars generalize this discussion of this hadith on everyone, and some mentioned, but there's also another Sahabi where the Prophet ﷺ understood that he's more powerful in his community and he has more impact, so he allowed him. When he asked to lead his community, Prophet ﷺ gave him this permission to do that. We have the famous example of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, اجعلني على خزائن الأرض إني حفيظ عليم. So Prophet Yusuf stepped up for leadership. And subhanAllah, Shaykh, I think there's two extremes. One extreme is people who are power hungry. They just want more. They want recognition. They just want to be in charge of everything. But there's also another extreme that I've seen with a lot of Muslim young professionals, which is complacency. People who feel I'm not good enough to lead, to teach, to be a board member.
Misplaced humility.
Misplaced humility. Thank you. And
I don't mean to sort of one-up you on terms. But
no.
I have so many names that run through my head when you say that, and I may even assume that some of them are complacent, mistakenly, but they're just... They're not indifferent. Complacent may sound like, I don't care or something like this, but they just I really wish I could help, but I'm just not fit for it,
No.
I need to memorize the Quran first or something.
It's also misunderstanding. أتأمرون الناس بالبر وتنسون أنفسكم. Like why do you remind people about good and you forget about yourself? And there's an assumption that everyone who should step on the minbar has to be perfect. Now, of course, don't get me wrong. You have to work on yourself. You have to command yourself to do good before you command others, and keep yourself in check. And what really works in this sense is to have a shura council, have somebody who really can give you advice to step up, and that same person or community or shura council should tell you to step down. And ideally, one brother gave me this rule: you need to, when you feel you don't need to speak or to give a lecture, then you have to give a lecture. When you feel that you want to grab the microphone and speak, and then sometimes you have to step down. So normally it's going against your hawa. Having a nasiha system around you is very important.
So not leaving the decision entirely to yourself, having a good trustworthy circle that can sort of tell you step down or hey, step up. Yeah. Very nice. But the third factor is that Sheikh Hatim actually once said something that was a paradigm shift. Like, it changed the whole lens for us. He said sometimes it is actually your fear of Allah that will cause you to step up. It's always like, oh, I'm afraid that I'm not fit for the position otherwise. No, actually, if you let someone lead salah that is making sort of very consequential mistakes in the tajweed to the point that it changes the meaning, and if that extends to al-Fatiha, that means the whole salah is invalid, you are punishable for not figuring out a way to get yourself up there, because you know that you've studied tajweed on some level and can recite al-Fatiha correctly. So you are now responsible for the validity of everybody's prayers. So we found out to be very powerful. It's always like the fear of Allah is going to keep you out. It's always spoken about in the context of inaction. But the fear of Allah should also promote action. That I need to do something. I got to figure it out.
SubhanAllah. And Shaykh, SubhanAllah, a lot of mentors told me this, that really it's sometimes in action or action, we put so much emphasis on ourselves, our thoughts, our inner, doubt or our inner praise, but sometimes people don't think about us. As simple as that. Like, really, I think people, for them, you're just another voice. You're just another lecture. So sometimes being so much caught in our inner thoughts really leads to inaction. And if we consider this as part of my spiritual journey, again, I am teaching others and I'm teaching myself. I'm trying to improve myself through serving the community. Wallahu alam.
That's nice. That's nice as well. The fear of Allah is going to sort of get me to step forward if there's a true void that needs to be filled. At the same time, I'm not going to feel a sense of ownership that I'm the ideal. I read, I don't know if I shared this in the last podcast episode or not, that Sulaiman alayhi salam, it's not traceable to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it's just a beautiful anecdote. I'm hoping it's true. If not, the essence of it, the lesson is certainly true. Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, I believe, reports that when Sulaiman alayhi salam had that massive kingdom, and he was the leader of the golden age of the kingdom of Israel, as they call it, right? It's Banu Israel's greatest kingdom. And of course, he had like domain over not just the human kingdom, but the animal kingdom. He had just like
multinational,
unprecedented kingdom, multi-species, right? He etched a ring for himself, and upon it, it said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It's so beautiful because like I'm just the interim here. I'm leading because I know I need to. I know I'm built for it. But I also am the substitute until the real leader of humanity comes. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It's just, it's such a heartwarming moment. I don't own this throne, right? And maybe that's where we want to transition to in the next part of this. You have a wonderful discussion in the book about not owning community work. Nobody owns it. No. Not the founder, not the most fiery volunteer. No. Not if you've put in the most money or you've put in the most hours. This is all for Allah Azza wa Jal, and I'm only here to serve where I can for however long I can.
نعم, subhanallah. So the ayah, famous ayah, وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. If you turn your back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace you. Very simple formula. The Meccans refused the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quraysh refused. Allah replaced them with the Ansar. The human beings did not respond to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah replaced them with jinns. The famous story. This hadith or this story in the book is actually from a famous story of the adhan, when one of the Sahaba basically saw the dream about the adhan, and he was basically You can say the owner of the idea or the starter or the initiator of the idea of the adhan. Of course, the Sahaba were brainstorming what are ways to invite to prayer, and the Sahabi Abdullah bin Zayd, although he brought the text of the adhan, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told him, "Mur Bilalan فإنه أندى منك صوتا." Just ask Bilal to say the adhan because he has a better qualifications for this. And this
in that
idea,
case, he had a more beautiful voice.
he has a beautiful voice. Abdullah ibn Maktoum also was the mu'adhin. The secondary mu'adhin had a beautiful voice. The originator of the idea got his reward, inshallah, but he doesn't have to be the one always on the spotlight. He doesn't have to really be the one who's resorted to for every opinion. And sometimes I think they call this in the business founder syndrome, where somebody thinks the business and the project is all about themselves and it's what they feel, what they see. Subhanallah, Sheikh, and you know more than me that the true test of the idea is when it goes beyond its founder, and it's not a one-man show anymore. It's when it becomes a movement, you know, an institution. And I feel we have many superheroes in the communities, mashallah, people who donated a lot, who put a lot of hours, and the masjid became part of their life. Masjid became one of their children, subhanallah. And we always joke around this in many communities that, yeah, I have 4 kids and the masjid is my 5th kid. And that's great, but sometimes it could become an unhealthy attachment. You want that kid who is your kid, okay, to grow, to move out of the house. You want that kid to get married. You want that kid, which is the masjid, to find another family to adopt him. You cannot be about you, subhanallah.
Overprotective parenting.
Overprotective parenting, subhanallah. And we all have seen, yani, no matter who you are, human beings will fall short. This is وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. And we see that in some of these communities. I used to be one of the youth groups in Michigan. I was one of the co-founders, and I loved that group. Really, it was one of my kids. And one of the most difficult decisions was to really step down and, you know, hand it over to Brother Khalid. And in the first couple of years, I gave him a hard time because, hey, this is not how you do this. You have to do it different ways. And I can say maybe the best service I have given to that youth group is when I stepped down. Because it grew 10x after I left. And I have to rest assured that alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the reward. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لا ينقص ذلك من أجورهم شيئا. And again, this is where the material versus...
If I'm in it for the reward, not for the materialistic gains, then the reward will not decrease with my absence.
No.
That's yeah, cannot be overstated. You know, I know a brother that works in the da'wah leadership, some of the most promising organizations in the English-speaking world. He is very successful in his personal life, entrepreneurial life, and startups and big businesses now, mashallah, and otherwise. And he's a great philanthropist, and Allah accepts from him. And he, to this point, I was complaining to him a few times about certain departments in my organization or in my masjid that I've helped build out, and then I walk away from, and it's so hard to drop your baby. That's what I tell him. It's so hard to drop your...
No.
He said, Muhammad, trust me. I've went through this over and over and over. It takes tawakkul, it takes a lot of reliance on Allah Azza wa Jal. But when you do it, here's what's going to happen. Number one, they're going to do a bad job. He's like, I'm not going to gloss it for you. They're not going to do it because they haven't owned it yet. You owned it. They're going to drop a few things. However, if you just trust the process, they will wind up doing it better than you once did. And he says, every single time, like a charm. It always happens this way, subhanAllah. So there's sincerity, and of course we're methodical, and we're trying to do things with ihsan and giving the bread to its baker. That's hard. You know, there's actually another challenge that even us imams struggle with. And I may be guilty of it every time I'm put in front of a microphone, which is over-speaking. And I always jokingly say it's your fault, guys. You gave me the microphone. We're used to being given the mic and being cut loose for 20 to 45 minutes, stretches, not knowing when to wear what hat, right? So like I feel extra guilty about it when I'm not on the microphone, and many people could be even assumed as like being arrogant, but this is their being elaborate, zooming out and zooming in, setting an asl foundation, building on it, being long-winded, basically. They do it at a barbecue, or sort of they do it like in front of a crowd in a living room and a couch, and that's not right. Likewise with management, you are a board member here, you are no longer the volunteer in that function there. You once were when the masjid was 17 people, but now that it's, if you don't give it to them, they're not going to stay empowered as volunteers. If you don't let them feel like you can come and veto anything or criticize anything, you'll lose them. You really will lose them. You got to know what hat to wear. You don't own it. You know, you did it, and it's hard, subhanAllah. You know, I remember the hadith, and I'm going to cut myself off now. But one of the many, we have so many hadith as you began mentioning about al-imara, about leadership. One of them you began about it being a trust, and then it being a source of disgrace and humiliation for many people on the Day of Judgment. And we don't give imara to anyone who asks it. That's the sort of the default because there's a conflict of interest usually when you're asking for it. We are none of us are immune. But there's a narration that says, beware of imara leadership. فَنِعْمَ الْمُرْضِعَ وَبِئْسَ الْفَاطِمَةِ. It's awesome to breastfeed. It's like basically you get the golden platter meal, right? It's awesome to breastfeed, and it's horrible to get weaned. That period when you're no longer, you know, eating or sort of consuming directly from mom or from who you're nursing from, weaning is miserable. And so you're just going to have to accept that you have to wean yourself off, and there's going to be some miserability to it. But that could be what keeps your project alive. That could be what solidifies your legacy, as you said, to live beyond you. It's painful, it's hard, but that's how you keep the volunteers engaged.
SubhanAllah. Sheikh, sometimes I feel that the challenges with community leadership is that people also believe in the one-man show. So people, when I stepped down, I remember many from the community members sincerely, they were sincere about it, but they were feeding that ego. They were feeding that feeling that, hey, what's going to happen after you? Well, guess what? SubhanAllah, nothing will happen because it's Allah's deen. Allah chose me to be in that role. And very importantly, when I stepped down, it's not that I'm quitting the community work. And that's another misconception, that people feel that I have to work on myself. So, and they go back to a seclusion, they go back to another Ghar Hira. And that's the problem with al-mutasaqitun ala tariq al-du'at. There's a famous book on this. The people who fall off after being involved in the community, after they leave, after that busy moment when they were starting the masjid, they might step down and do nothing, which is another extreme that we should not have.
Wallahi, Sheikh, you said earlier, I wanted to latch on it, but I didn't want to derail you from your point. You're completing your thought. You said the most disenfranchised group in the community are the volunteers or potential volunteers. And that hurt because if you think about it, the guys who think it takes one-man show, right? The consumer of the community, right? He doesn't see what it takes to make this happen, right? And so they're also not very frustrated. They also don't know about the failed plans. They just know about the completed plans and this sort of thing.
They see the trailer, the 3-minute trailer, not the 3-hour movie.
Yeah, and so they're actually like a lot of times happy. Like they're okay from a distance. Mashallah, we got a khutbah happen this week. No. It's like you don't understand. We had this big speaker coming and it got canceled. And we had to eat the bill because the weather, and they don't know any of this, right? No. Or the banquet got shut down. So, and of course, the people that are maybe staff will get prioritized, and maybe they should, but not entirely, right? More so than but the volunteer usually doesn't finish his term in volunteership, except if they're angry at the community. Right? Except that they break off altogether. And best case scenario, they left feeling sort of burnt out or unappreciated or sort of slighted. And they become, if they remain volunteer, they become a freelance volunteer. And maybe that's a good build for the next question, which is, please discourage the world as you did very well in the book. Like, what is the sort of the plus minus when it comes to being a freelance volunteer versus being a teamwork player? Of course, teamwork is so hard. Takes sacrifice, takes swallowing a lot, it takes being patient, not on your time, but we need it, right? But so many people just sort of like, I'm going to do my thing, I don't want to be associated, connected.
So subhanAllah, Sheikh, of course this has been a trend, as you said. It's almost, you can predict for certain individuals, yes, this person might end up becoming his own institution or his own thing, or this family, they start their own non-profits. There's a lot of ahadith in this. One of my favorite ahadith, المؤمن الذي يخالط الناس ويصبر على أذاهم خير من الذي لا يخالط الناس ولا يصبر على أذاهم. The believer who really mixes with the people and is patient on their harm. And the Prophet ﷺ, who normally says these very concise ahadith. He repeated a lot of wording in this hadith to emphasize that you are better if you're mixing with the people and you are patient on their harm. So which tells us there's a harm of being with a community and there's a harm of being in solitude. And the harm of solitude is bigger than the harm of the community. This is a clear statement from the Prophet ﷺ, because that person in solitude, effectively they're not really living alone. They're being bombarded with social media and secular leadership books and whatever, but they only feel
at best.
There's distance from the community. So subhanAllah, they're victims to these emotions. The other hadith that really should give us that image, which is المؤمن للمؤمن كالبنيان يشد بعضه بعضا وشبك بين أصابعه صلى الله عليه وسلم, when he intermingled in between his hands to emphasize that, you know, the image of being a brick in the structure of the ummah. So that brick, that piece, if it's by itself on the road, nobody will benefit from it. Nobody will give it any value. So in the age of individualism and, you know, the ego and, you know, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, you are nothing if you're by yourself, but you are everything when you are part of that, you know, structure.
Just to translate the hadith, because I know you were sort of in a rhythm to complete the thought. The believer to the believer is like a building or a structure. That parts of it reinforce one another, and then he interlaced between his fingers like that.
Yeah, so it's basically you completed the hadith because this, because how the Prophet ﷺ gave that imagery. So it's dangerous when we want to work on our own. We want to learn Islam on our own. When we want to serve on our own. And when we see what's happening in Gaza, when we see all the Muslim voice, yes, we are loud on numbers on social media, but the impact for us is really minimal. It's because we really have to step over this difficulties. Yes, there's always friction, and we should not normalize this friction. That's not all. That's another extreme.
We're going to minimize, but expect that it'll always be there. You know, one brother in the community, one of these sort of, I'm doing my job and I'm disappearing, is wonderful. Like, the no drama brother that everybody loves, right? The no drama volunteer. And he says to me, one time I told him, I'm really sorry about how things happened last night. I think someone raised his voice at him or something like that. He's like, listen, if things are going smooth, that means shaitan does not feel threatened by our work. I was like, whoa, mashallah. And that's the idea, right? Like, if you want to go faster without the headache, you go alone. But if you want to go farther, you have to go as a team. I came across, just first time in my life, a few months ago, I came across a narration for Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anh, where he said, stick to the jama'ah, stay close to the community. Of course, the hadith says because the wolf eats the stray sheep. We know this concept. But he pointed out the fact that there is inconvenience, but it's for the greater good. He said, stick to the jama'ah, the community. He said, فَإِنَّ الَّذِي تَكْرَهُونَ فِي الْجَمَاعَةِ خَيْرٌ مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ فِي الْفُرْقَةِ. That which you resent in the community is still better than that which you like about being alone. Going your own way, doing your own thing. Seems nice at a glance, but it's just a ruse by shaitan to have you all to himself, if you will.
And you know, Sheikh, what really, I wouldn't say it bothers me, but I feel the biggest challenge we have as a community is in the internal conflicts, not the external enemy.
Always.
Because, you know, this famous hadith, and we mentioned this in the book, about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ making 3 du'as to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was given 2, and 1 was not given. And if you think about it, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ telling us his dua is mustajab 99% of the time, this dua was not given, أَلَّا يَجْعَلَ بَأْسَهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ شَدِيدًا, that our internal conflict to be minimized, and the Prophet ﷺ was not given this da'wah. So we are given clear evidence in that prophetic tradition that yes, this is the aqaba, this is the uphill that we have to overcome, which is our internal conflicts. If we learn how to work together, if we go beyond these masjid politics, these voting discussions about this concept or that concept, these fiqh opinions, if we go beyond all of these challenges, wallahi, we will move mountains. It's really, we're always focused about others, what others are doing to us, but we forget about that the challenge is really from within, subhanallah.
No, subhanAllah, you can't control the behavior of others, but you can control your own behavior. And like, I want to just encourage one more time as we're winding down with the episode, that being preemptive, preventative, better than a cure, right? With culturing or instilling in the culture of the organization. Like, I'll mention once again with some ambiguity or confidentiality, something that happened at Yaqeen, that it wasn't a conflict, but it was an eye-opening moment for me, that I assumed that everyone that was onboarding into the organization was growing very fast, was automatically on the same level, thinking the same way, committed to the deen, to the same practice. Till one sister, she admitted to us one Ramadan, I believe it was, about 2 years into it, that, you know, I just want to tell you my appreciation to everyone here, just being around you. I finally started praying, and I was like, whoa, you know, you finally started praying, like, that's wonderful. But I was like, I never once assumed, right? And so even the idea of people coming into a company, they need to get oriented. They need sort of likewise, we have to continue investing in our volunteers. And I just want to encourage everyone to really just grab the book. I'm so sorry, like, with the shameless plugs in front of you, Sheikh. Forgive me, but and the likes of it. Like, after you finish this book, it's not the type of book where you read it once and just put it down. You cycle through these notions so that they remain vivid. The voice, as you said, of the Prophet ﷺ remains audible. You know, you drown out the other noise. It becomes our second nature to operate on these values, because that's the only way forward. That's the only way forward. Anything we didn't say, Sheikh, that you'd love to share? I don't tell them too much, or else they're not going to buy the book. No, but really, I mean, alhamdulillah, you've spent a lot of time on this, and it's clear that this wasn't random. This was sort of what you reflected on after seeing so much of what worked and didn't work on the ground, right?
SubhanAllah. Sheikh, I know that there's one last thought that I would like to conclude, and this was the inspiration behind starting this project, which is the hadith that we always hear, إذا قامت الساعة, if the hour is about to start and you have a sapling in your hand, and if you can afford to finish planting your seed, then do it, even if the hour is about to start. So we've always heard this hadith multiple times, and but if you try to zoom out and look at the context, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that you started, you didn't wait for the hour to start, you took proactive measures. You started by intending to plant the seed. So the whole idea is that we always talk about, look at the challenges in the ummah, and we ask, what's our role? What do we need to do? But the ideal case is to start doing something. Build your ark, build the ark like the ark of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. So, and also the idea in this hadith is that imagine there's no human being after you to benefit from your seed. There's no sunlight, there's no even oxygen to plant to grow your tree. Just finish planting your seed. In the productive Muslim lingo, we call this the gardener mindset, the idea of really planting your seed and detaching from the results. And you asked something about the corporate world and the hustle culture and how they infiltrated our thinking. We call this the hustle culture and also the carpenter mindset. People think about goals and objectives as a carpenter, that it's a fixated outcome. Whereas as a Muslim, you just really
everything is mathematical. 1 + 1 is 2.
Yeah, and if you don't see the result that you really envisioned for, then you get frustrated and you burn out and you just stop doing what you're doing. Whereas a gardener will really plant the seed and focus on the process and leave the product and the outcome up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, in a spiritual sense, we believe that the outcome is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when it comes to really organizing meetings and actual work, we get so caught up with the kind of day-to-day hustle and bustle, and we measure things again with material standards. And I think planting our seeds, even if the hour is about to start, I think every year, I don't know, Sheikh, if you agree, but every Jum'ah, you have hundreds of topics to talk about. I remember back in the days, like 10 years ago, I used to recycle khutbahs every month. I would give the 4 weeks khutbahs in different masajid the same topic, because there isn't a lot of activity happening. Now, within a given week, you have really multiple events to talk about, because the fitan, the challenges are only increasing. And we just have to really maybe focus on planting the seed, even if we think that disasters are happening around us, because they will keep happening at an accelerated pace. So that's kind of the message I would like to leave to people, inshallah. We ask Allah to help us really plant meaningful seeds that will really outlive us, inshallah.
Ameen, ameen. Jazakallah kullu khair. Barakallahu li wa lak, Sheikh. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept us in His service. And we thank you all, everyone who's been listening and sharing their feedback and their experiences. And I'm sure even you, putting together some of the content, whether it is in the written form or in the life coaching and leadership training domains, you may not have expected I think sometimes I say to myself, I would never say this for others, that it is from our weakness that Allah Azza wa Jal shows us some of the fruits very early. Because we're just so
عجولة.
hasty that we might quit. And so also if you assume the best of Allah Azza wa Jal, He may start sending you some bright moments, some fruits, some harvest as the farmer, just to keep you going for another season. So assume the best of Allah, keep your relationship and your expectations of Him, tier one, and look for some of it, and you'll see it. Look for some of the wisdom, look for some of the product, and you will see it. Maybe not as much as you would like, and that means Allah has given you an ambitious soul. And keep looking until Allah gives you your grand prize. He'll give you the first installment here. May Allah help all our volunteers and reward them in ways that only He can. We constantly just say the verbiage of Jazakallahu khairan to all of our volunteers. But the hadith says that if someone extends a favor to you and you cannot repay them, say Jazakallahu khairan. May Allah reward you well. And so when we say Jazakallahu khairan right now, we mean it all, whether we know you or not, from the bottom of our heart. May Allah reward you in a way that we can't repay. That's really what it means. May He give you beyond what humans can offer. He is the King of Kings.
So it's J-A-K and M-A-R, Jack and Mary? You know that?
Oh my God, it's a pet peeve of mine, abbreviating acts of worship. Alhamdulillah for that. جزاك الله خير everyone. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.